Alafia. I'm Dr. Gloria L, Peace, host and producer of Omni Presents the H3O Art of Life show. Today's topic is about restoring your true identity. My guest is Wayne Sebamurti Gentry, and he is the founder of the SIA Foundation, as well as the author of 2 books, which are available, but you will see them after we have finished our program. I'm delighted that you're here to join us, and I'm also delighted that we can segue from the service that we just experienced, because I thought it was wonderful that we ended with Amazing Grace, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. And that is what this discussion is about. It's about finding your true self. The other thing I'm happy about is that we have something in our service that gives credence to this presentation. And love is the spirit of this church, and service is our prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Today, we will continue to seek the truth in love. So I'd like to welcome Wayne Sebamurti, hereafter referred to as only Sebamurti, to give some opening remarks.
I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me out here to speak at the forum. I'm very happy to be here. And if possible, can we just take a brief moment of silence? Thank you. Yes, I want to start out at the onset by speaking about the very unique consciousness that we have as human beings, and that we are not born automatically knowing who we are. And as we mature, we do not go through an automatic unfoldment of coming into an understanding of who we are, and that is something that is left to be discovered. We must discover who we are. This is why also you see among civilizations education and enculturation, that we have to be educated. Whereas all other beings of a lower form, they operate out of instincts. We must be educated and we must be enculturated, and our consciousness must be guided by that. And it's a journey to discover who we are that beholds the truth of who we really are. And there have been many human beings since time immemorial that have made such a discovery of who we really are. And they have shared with us their insights, and various spiritual traditions and religions have been founded behind what they have left as their insights and their teachings. And they have a consensus message for humanity, that the common denominative experience for all human beings who have not discovered who they really are is that of suffering. And that once you come to discover and know who you really are, and know the true nature of reality, that brings an end to your suffering. And this says that who we are in our natural knowledge of who we are is that of peace, is that of happiness. This is one of the things that you will find at the center of what has been discovered by these spiritual beings that have awakened into a knowledge of who they are. And that the reason why we suffer is because we have lost the knowledge of who we are. And that once recovered it, a popular term that's used to represent that is enlightenment, then that your suffering will end, that you will not have suffering anymore.
I'm thinking now that we all think, because from childhood we have been introduced to ourselves. We were given names at birth. They appear on our birth certificates. We went to school. We were known. We are known by those names. Women who married often changed their names, their surnames, to match their husband's names. And so when someone says, we don't know who we really are, it doesn't really ring a bell, because you do know who you really are, and you can give a resume, a lengthy resume of who you are and who you have been, and sometimes who you plan to be. So that when we're talking about true identity, we're talking about something that is beyond this body. We identify with this body, we identify with this personality, but we are more than this body. We are more than this personality. And that is what we want to aim for today.
Exactly. And the means by which you discover that you are more than this body is through a meditative process. You have to go within. This is another central message that you will find with the sages and the mystics across cultures, across ages, that is through going within that you discover your real identity. There's nothing that is given to you in a social setting or by your foreparents as an identity that they call you by and you identify yourself, or in you reflecting on who you think you are from the image that you have developed about yourself. It has nothing to do with that. One of the things that you will find out when you enter into a meditative practice is that who you think you are is far from who you really are. And that this personality that you have become identified with, which is connected to this body and mind, which makes you think that you are separate from other people, this is the root of all your suffering, because we cling to this body, we cling to this mind out of ignorance of who we really are. And if you search and study the literature that has been left behind in the spiritual traditions, you will find out that who you really are is a non-local and non-temporal being, that you are a spiritual being having a human experience, and that your identity, the restoring of your identity, comes through a meditative process, and it's something that must be revealed. It's a revelatory process. It's not anything that you can go out and look and search for, go in and look and search for in any affirmative sense. The meditative process involves you disengaging your attention from all of the things that would have you identify with those things that you are not. It's more of a negative process where you see and affirm that you are not the body, that you are not this mind, that you are not the emotions, that you're not the identity that you've been given by your society. And through that negative process, who you really are, who you've always been and could never not be, except for your not being aware of it, will reveal itself. Truth is a revelatory process. Because it's something that always is, it's not lost. What's lost is our attention not being in the right place so that we can become aware of it. And that's one of the principal things that you must subject yourself to in a meditative process, is disciplining your attention. That's what meditation is about. Because it's through attention that you become aware of everything. And the identity that you think yourself to be now is something that is going on because your attention is locked into this body and locked it to this mind. But when you meditate, you begin to have experiences that expand your awareness because you discipline your attention, and there are aids and supports that help you to discipline your attention so that you can become aware of yourself beyond just this superficial identity that you've taken on, mainly through the society that you have grown up in. You find out that it's a social construct. It's not something that you yourself have created on your own. It's something that you've been helped to excel, helped to embrace, and helped to identify with through all of the people that you come in contact with. But if you're coming in contact with people and they're helping you to establish yourself in an identity of something that is really not who you are, the outcome of that in your interaction with these other people is always going to be more suffering. This is the key message that you find in all of the mystics and all of the sages in their discourses, that this is the common denominative experience of all people who have not awakened to who they really are. That it is of your nature to be happy, it's of your nature to be peaceful, and that conflict can only exist where there is division, and there will be no division once you realize that who you are is a being, as a spiritual being, non-different from any other being. And the only thing that would have us see ourselves as being different are conditioning factors that we have embraced through errors in our thinking and errors in our ways of paying attention to the nature of reality that has brought this about. And entering into a meditative process enables you to disengage your attention from that. And once you do that, your awareness expands and you begin to see beyond your conditioned way of seeing yourself, and you begin to, in a sense, you won't even ask in that moment, who am I? In the beginning, you may ask that as an initial question to start you off on a journey. But at the end of that journey, there is no who, because who is a distinction that does not relate to consciousness as at its ground level. When you see that you are one with all beings, you won't even ask who.
It may seem unfamiliar to think that one should go on a search for oneself. But on the walls of the pyramids, the most ancient people wrote, "Know thyself," which must suggest that we don't really know ourselves. We know a self, we know an ego, but we don't really know ourselves. Now, what is the benefit of knowing your true identity? I would think that one of the benefits would be liberation, to free ourselves from illusions, to free ourselves from conditioned thinking, which holds hostage our free will, because the thoughts that we think we inherited when we were children, we were taught to think the thoughts that were thought by the people who reared us. Certainly, that was not without value. Certainly, we needed guidance, and certainly we needed protection from ourselves. But at the same time, one needs to rise out of the bondage of conditioned thinking, because when you do that, you begin to free yourself to imagine and to explore other thoughts or the other ideas, other things that may enable you to become who you are in the first place. Now we, and I'm talking about this group of people, have been through a lot of belief systems, at least more than one. we don't always agree with what other people think, and sometimes we don't always agree with each other. But we feel that wherever we are on our life's journey, we are welcome to be in this congregation. So we are welcome to explore. No one can tell us that we cannot go on a search for who or what we choose to believe. But what we really want to arrive at is truth. We really want to know the truth of who we really are. And that will not be found in just accepting someone else's definition of ourselves.
Precisely. Because, as I said earlier, truth, it always is. Right now, in this moment, right now, all of us are our true selves. It can never not be that. But we are not aware of it. And that makes all the difference in the world. The only difference between us and a sage who has become enlightened and know who he or she truly is that non-awareness. And this is what they say to us. Right now, in this moment, right now, we are what we are looking for, what we are searching for. We are that because it's our very nature. The belief that we are separate from our nature sends us off on a search outwardly, thinking that our peace and happiness exists in other things. It may be, we may think that it's in other people. We may think that it's in the owning of things. We may think that it's in establishing ourselves in a certain status within the community or the nation or whatever. But those things are impermanent and those things are not truthful. That's not who you really are. The way to come into the now and to know who you are, you have to transcend this mind that is making all of these illusions, which a popular term that is used is Maya. Transcending that mind through meditation will reveal to you who you are. In meditation, I've been speaking that word quite often. I'm sure many of you have heard it before too. Meditation has the root word medi in it. And it shares the same root as medication and medicine, which is to heal and to balance. So when you are entering into a meditative process, it's a healing of the mind. Who you are at the level of your spirit, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing to be added to, nothing to be taken away from. You are perfect as you are as a spiritual being. But being that your knowledge, your consciousness is confounded and clouded by ignorance of who you really are, there's an imbalance in that. And us trying to live our life on the basis of that and us acting out of that is what's causing all of the problems. So meditation is a way of restoring balance and bringing balance at the level of your mentation, your mind. And this is why it necessarily involves you silencing the mind, bringing the whole thinking process to a halt. Because also, especially within this Western culture, we've been acclimated to believe that thinking is the most powerful thing that one can do in the world, that it's going to solve all of your problems. All you have to do is give it more thought, give it more thought. But actually what you're doing is you're creating more fragmentation in your whole way of perceiving and coming to know really what is going on in your self-experience of this world when you give it more thought. This is the message that the mystics, the sages, bring to us. And that is through meditation, through learning how to silence your mind and get beyond thought that you connect with a deeper part of your being, which is pure intelligence, that helps to reveal who you really are.
I want us to engage something that's probably a concern of everybody. And then that is this whole notion of birth and death. Most people have some concerns about birth, and most people have some ideas about it that lend to suffering beyond what we ought to have to suffer. If you have ever had, if you have ever lost a child, that is deep suffering. The loss of a parent is deep suffering. The loss of a mate is deep suffering. A close friend is deep suffering. What is birth? What is death? What is life? How can we gain a perspective that will enable us to suffer less because we are aware of a greater perspective?
Now, you know, that's a big one. That is truly a big one there. And it hits hard at the heart and center of all of our concerns, because each of us have those experiences, and some of us may even be going through them right now. And it's a very big topic because we approach and we orient ourselves to life in accordance to how we've been educated and what has come out of the culture that we have been brought up in. And so our understanding of birth and death naturally will be emerging from how we've been taught to perceive and relate to it. And all of it hinges on the perceiving of another person as being a body and a mind. So the loss of the life is connected to the person that has passed on. The beginning or the gaining of a life is connected to the birth of a person that comes into the world. But life has no opposite. The birth and death are opposites. Living and dying are opposites. Dead and alive are opposites. But life has no opposite. So life always is. When we talk about birth and we talk about death, we are mentioning the exit and the interest of the animated life energy expressing within this physical realm. But life doesn't go out of existence. There is life after death. There is life before death. So it's a big topic because there's so much that's needed to really set up supports within our minds frame as to aid us in comprehending what I'm saying in terms of life not having any opposites and life always existing. But if through having an insight you can see how your living ends, but your life does not end. Who you are is never born. You never dies. And once you awaken to who you are, you live in your conscious experience of yourself as a witness. Everything is witness. You witness the pain that the body undergoes. You don't witness any suffering, because suffering is an inappropriate response to what could be pain, an inappropriate response in an error in perception in your way of aligning how you are perceiving reality, that causes you to suffer. When you cling on and you desire things that are impermanent, that are bound to change, that's going to cause you to suffer. And many of us experience suffering when there is a loss of life. Well, there's not a loss of life, but there is a loss of the living, that life expressed itself through this human form. But if we can have the insight that living has come to an end, that the body has removed itself from being a vehicle for the expression of the consciousness, that life was living in the body, if we can have that insight, then it would ease up and it would actually eliminate, if we have the consummate insight, it would eliminate any kind of suffering that you would encounter with what we call the loss of life. So it's a big topic because it's not too common within the establishment of our understanding here in the West about there being life after death, and I'm saying that not in the sense of going to heaven or having an experience in hell, because that is one of the first things that comes to mind when people think about life or there being some experience after death. It is an actual teaching. I'll just mention two. I can't go into them deeply, but one is called the Per Imheru, the coming forth into day, misnomered as the book of the dead, ancient Egyptian book of the dead. It's the Per Imheru. It talks about the after death experiences. I say after death experience, not after life, but the experiences that life has after death. And there's also the Bardo Tao, the Tibetan book of the dead, misnomered as the Tibetan book of the dead, whereas there are actually instructions that are given to the deceased in its navigation, in its journey, and to understand experiences of what happens after death. So it gets kind of deep and it gets kind of profound, but one thing I will say in relationship to that is that while we are here, we have to really take advantage of this human birth that we have, to do all that we can to awaken to who we really are. And that is a process of recognition. You awaken to recognize who you have always been. It's like in our living now, we are asleep. In fact, when it has been said that when the Buddha was asked, what are you? Who are you? He said, I am awake. Mm-hmm. But in a sense, we are asleep to who we really are. We have forgotten who we really are. And we must resurrect in our knowledge of who we really are. And that's a recognition process. But while we are here in this living realm where we are living, we need to take advantage as much as we can of having this human body and try to do all that we can to come closer in the hope the goal, of course, is to accomplish, but to do all that we can to awaken and know who we are and take advantage of all the aids that we have at our disposal through meditating, through moral development, through purifying our energies, through doing things that can help us, because once we enter the dying phase and there's a dissolution of all of the elements of the body as the consciousness returns back to its ground state, when death arises, you don't have all of what you have now to try to awaken. There's some experiences that take place after death, and what you can take with you. When people say that you can't take anything with you when you die, you can't take anything with you, that's not true. you can't take any object with you. You can't take any people with you. But what necessarily is always with you is who you are and how well you have disciplined your attention to recognize and to expand your awareness. What happens after, you see what you got me into here. What happens after death, there are certain experiences that you undergo, and some people that have had a near-death experience can recount and give credence to what I'm saying. They can validate what is being said. But once you have exited and had a death experience, there are experiences for life after death. How you have trained your attention can aid you in the whole awakening process. And if there is not an awakening of your consciousness in the after-death realm, you will awaken at a higher level upon taking rebirth and start off at a much higher level than you were in this life, because life goes on. This is not the only life you've lived. It's not the only life that you're going to live. But there's much more I can say without, I don't want to go what I want.
I wonder if it had occurred to anyone that you did not have to inherit this human body. Has anyone ever considered that your incarnation could have been as something other than a human being, something other than the gender that you are, something other than the, quote, ethnic group, race, these other terms that you are? Have you ever considered that this precious human birth is a gift, and that you have it through grace and for a reason? I'd like to hear some people who are listening respond to that. Has it ever occurred to you, Beverly?
Yes, and I've heard the phrase precious human birth used quite a lot in my studies of Buddhism. And sometimes I actually wish that I could be some other species. I get a little fed up with our species sometimes. Not just others, but the expression here as well. We're a very, very contradictory bunch. But the Buddhist idea is that there's just enough suffering and just enough wisdom in a human incarnation to be able to learn, to gain enlightenment, or to be able to explore more who we are. That if we didn't have suffering, there'd be nothing to drive us to explore. And if it's all suffering, we just can't lift our heads up enough to look around.
I keep thinking about only adults. What happens when a child dies or stops living? Is that child able to do this too?
Can you say that again?
Oh, I'm thinking about adults with what you're saying, but what about children? If a child dies, say, 11 years of age, is that child able to do something about finding out more about stopping the living or whatever? I'm not making myself clear, but I keep thinking about adults and about children that are born.
Yes, you're making yourself very clear. That life gets recalibrated, and that child, the life that lived as a child, will take on another life. The issue of what you're speaking to is karma And that's considered like the mundane right. The right view within the Buddhist tradition has two angles to it. One is like the super mundane, and the other is the mundane. The mundane one covers the karma, and there's a lot involved in that I don't believe we have as much time to go into. But a child that dies, that life has another life. I mean, there are adults, we presume that when a child dies that it has not reached or it has not learned enough perhaps to move higher or closer in the awareness of who they are because of their age. But there are many adults who live to be many years in age and are further away from understanding who they are. They get further away because of their mind thinking and adding more illusions onto its load as it grows old, and experience in the after-death realms a far harder and greater difficulty in trying to expand their awareness than that child. Am I making myself clear? Mm-hmm. So it's we think when you mature as an adult, as you grow old, physically there's not much conscious participation needed to grow. You're going to see corresponding changes take place at the physical level, but emotionally and psychologically, a great deal of conscious participation is needed in that growth and development in this proper and orderly way. And the vast majority of adults, as they grow old, they don't experience that. And I'm sure you hear the confessions of many about the suffering that they encounter, the confusion that's in their mind, in spite of them being old.
I hate to bring this up personally, but when I was 20-some years of age, graduated from college, I had a younger sister who died a horrible, horrible death with cancer. She was 11 years old. And to this day, I think about it. And at that time, I remember thinking, wow, I wish I could believe that I would see her again. Now with all this that you're talking about, it's brought all that memory back. And I don't know what, it was a very, very hard thing. And I'm thinking about her. Did she come back in a better life? So I don't know. It's just brought all that back into my head. In many of the African traditions, they wait a long time before they bestow a name on a child because they want to really see what is this spirit that has come back to us. So they don't automatically, on the first day, give it a name. And then there's a naming ritual that is undergone to give the child its name. And sometimes it takes days or weeks before the child even receives its name because of the attempts that is being made to feel a resonance of what is the soul that has now come back to join us. And also it's acknowledged within the African family that the family consists of the yet to be born, those who have passed on, and also the living. So the extended family embraces all who have gone on
those who have yet to come, and those who are still living. Yes.
Yeah, one of the great learnings I had was when I lived in Evanston, there was a Chinese family living in the block, and my daughter was just, she was like 6, 7, and she had friends with the couple of Chinese kids, and she went to a birthday party for one of them who was 7. And she came back and she was really confused, because these were Taoists, that they were Chinese Taoists, Taoism. And all the older men and women were crying at this 7-year-old's birthday. And so I said, I better check this out, because it really kind of disturbed my daughter. And I went over and introduced myself and said, I just wanted to know, my daughter was confused because there was a lot of crying. And they said, well, that's part of our belief, is that at 7 or 8 years old, the logical mind takes over. And now we can no longer ask the child, tell us about the afterlife. So we have to find another child that will inform us about the afterlife. And I was really taken up with this, so I read a lot. And it's a very unique universal view, because here is what most in the West is considered ignorant. Ignorant, I mean, you think of the history of children being beaten and literally ignored, or just turned into slaves, whatever. And here is almost the opposite. So they revere the two things. They revere the child before 7, and then they revere the elders after 70. And I was thinking, those are the two groups that are the most kind of ignored in this culture. So I had a lot to learn. I'm still learning. But that one really turned me around. So I went home and told my daughter, and she said, that makes a lot of sense. And she's 6, okay? So, but when she hit 7, there was a change. There was a change. Now she started questioning and analyzing, and it's really a very powerful, I think, thing. Yeah. Sorry, I don't think that.
Just a lot of different things that takes place within various cultures that seem so foreign to those of us who are unfamiliar with their ways. And in this culture is a way of life, and the way of living that we are experiencing cannot be divorced from the culture that we are brought up in. And to expand your awareness to the point of knowing who you really are, you have to go beyond the culture itself. You have to be brought up in the culture, but you have to transcend it, because you don't want to identify with the culture. Who you are is a non-local being. It's non-temporal. Yes.
I was just thinking of like the idea of what you would be like, if, considering the idea if I was born an animal instead. I guess like I've thought about that, maybe more as a kid or something. But when I think of how I would think about that before, it was more like not really considering being born into the world as an animal, but being like me, getting to put myself into an animal and getting to run around like a dog or something. I feel like the experience is would be way different, and the idea of like conscious, like true being or essence or whatever, being expressed through like a person, just as well as like an animal. Like it's I don't know, it's kind of fascinating to think of like, oh, how would whatever I am at my core, being filtered through an animal, how would that, if I could be the same thing in a person or an animal, how that would come out through an animal as opposed to as me as the trappings of a person is, you know, kind of hard to tell what it would be, but it's fascinating. It's got my wheels turning.
It's a blessing, and not that it's a curse. I don't want to think or introduce any type of way of speaking about matters, whereas the opposite comes up, even as a subliminal thought. It's a blessing and it's a precious human birth that we have, because we have a unique consciousness that's able to double back on itself, self-reflective. In the Sanskrit terminology, it's called Vimarsa. There are three Sanskrit terms, Vimarsa, Visarga, and Sankoka, that consciousness has the ability to be all contractive. That's Sankoka. All expansive. That's Visarga. And all reflective. And that's Vimarsa. And that's what we have as human beings. That's why we can know that we know. And the term that is used as a Western term, Homo sapiens sapien, a man who knows that he knows. You have a unique consciousness that can direct its attention back on itself and know itself. And that's being that we have this unique consciousness, it has its disadvantages too, because then now there's the choices that we can have is multiplied millionfold. And you can be taken down directions of choosing and doing things that are superficial and have nothing to do with your spiritual development or nothing to do with anything about knowing who you are. So this is why disciplines of practices of meditation must be implemented so that you can do all that you can do and be all that you can be in this human body, and utilize this consciousness and have the experiences in an unrestricted way. Animals have restrictions in that they operate on the basis of their instincts. You never see them doing anything different in their natural habitat. They do the same thing over and over and over again, generation after generation after generations. But humans, we're constantly building, we're constantly creating and establishing relationships. We can relate not only to each other as human beings, where we can establish relationships of planets, of solar systems, of galaxies. You know, we have a unique consciousness that makes the whole structure of the cosmos intelligible to itself. But a popular statement that was made by an Indian sage, Ramana Maharshi, he said that to learn all there is to know about what is going on in the cosmos and to not know who you are amounts to learned ignorance. So to know and have all of this knowledge about things as a human being, which is one of the things that we have at our disposal, the ability that we can do, doesn't mean that it's a benefit. There can be a great detriment, because look at the magnitude of destruction and death that can be brought on to other beings sharing this earth with us because of a human being that has become extremely eccentric. The death and destruction that can be done. So having this human body and expressing itself with this unique consciousness that we have is an extreme benefit, but if it is not enculturated rightly and educated rightly, and if we do not subject ourselves to moral development and meditative practices, then the outcome is going to be what you see pretty much going on in the world in terms of conflict all over the world. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It's only that way because we do not know who we are. Once you recover who you really are and know yourself to be a spiritual being. And this happens as a transformation of consciousness. It's not just something that you one day see and say, oh, okay, now I got it. It's a real transformative act that takes place. And this is why, in some ways, a human being is compared to a butterfly, and that we go through a transformation, whereas they go through a metamorphosis at the physical level. Ours is conscious-wise, where you really have this thought shift in your whole way of seeing and being in the world when you awaken to who you really are. And there's a lot of things that you can do with the energies of your mind and your body once you have become awake to who you are. This is why a lot of times, too, you will see, especially in you learning through your studies of spiritual teachers as it relates to biographies of these sages and mystics, that many of them people would bring folks to them for healing so that they can, receive a healing.
I think that you should tell people about who you are in this body, in this incarnation, and how you came to this point in your spiritual development.
We got about 5 more hours. That's just a joke. No, real quickly, it's a mystery to me. As I started out, I was about 11 or 12 years old when I gained interest in this particular person named U.S. Anderson. And he had some books. One of them was The Magic in Your Mind, another one was The 3 Magic Words, and another one was The Secret of Secrets. And all in that book, he spoke about enlightenment. He spoke about the ego, and he talked about how you're not really being who you think you are, and that to awaken to who you really are is the end of suffering. And I'm 11 and 12 years old reading about this, and I had something resonated with me with those words. And at the end of each chapter, it had a meditation in it. I would memorize the meditation and become absorbed in the words and make it a part of my thinking and my feeling as it relates to myself and other people. And I put it into practice what I was learning from him at that age. And I was also very much into martial arts. And I was learning about martial arts, and I had a Sifu, his name was Carl Noble, and his teacher, one of his teachers was Dan Armasano, which was Bruce Lee's #1 student. And so he was very much into Bruce Lee, and so I emulated him, so I wanted to learn more about Bruce Lee also. And I acquired a lot of Bruce Lee books, and I noticed in his book, particularly the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, I was very attracted to the way Bruce Lee thought, his philosophical thought. And I was more attracted to his thinking than the martial arts. And in his book, he said for guidance and inspiration, he mentioned Zen and Krishnamurti. And so I said, I want to learn more about Zen and Krishnamurti. I didn't know anything about them. So I went to a bookstore in Clarkson, Brentana, and B. Dalton bookstore, and would get books on Zen philosophy. I bought this book called The Gospel According to Zen, and in it, it had a chapter called Self-Knowledge by Krishnamurti. I said, wow, is that a coincidence? Zen and Krishnamurti at the same time. And when I read that chapter, it blew me away by Krishnamurti. And the chapter was called Self-Knowledge, and it was about knowing who you are. And then from there, I acquired all of the books that I could on him and videotapes and all of that. And I started trying to learn more about myself from reading and engaging in people who were into spiritual matters and learning how to meditate and from there, I had insights and would jot down my insights, and we started having conversations and talks in regard to some of the insights I've had. And in fact, the book that's on the table called The Nature of Intelligence is a book that was transcribed and compiled by my wife, who's videotaping this program here. And that she transcribed the talks that we had. That book is a compilation of actual talks, very similar to talks that we have in here now. And we were exploring what is the nature of intelligence, because that's also who we are. We are intelligence. You don't have to be made intelligent. You are intelligent. If there's anything that's operating that looks to be something other than intelligent, that's a conditioning factor operating, and all you need to do is remove your attention from that stream and connect back to your intelligence, which is who you are, your nature, and use that intelligence to solve all your problems. So my journey started with that U.S. Anderson and reading that book from that young age, and I never stopped reading. I never stopped. I had joined various groups, spiritual groups, and listened to different teachers speak. And the message had always been to go within and to find out who you are from yourself. You can learn and get a start from someone else, but the real teacher is yourself, because you learn in attention. And